talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on...
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave, and this week it's the Acteurist Oeuvre-view. We've got a pair of Setsuko Hara films, both directed by Mikio Naruse. We will be discussing 1954's The Sound of the Mountain and 1956's Sudden Rain, but we're going to talk about them in the reverse order because that's the way we watched them today.
It may help to keep our brains clear as they can be. So I wasn't able to find, in my brief post-viewing research, wasn't able to find a lot of discussion about these films on the internet, or even anything beyond the most basic information. Where did we get the impression that Naruse was a feminist filmmaker? Was it just from watching his films, or is there somebody you can recall specifically saying that?
I just feel like every one of his films that we've seen has been centered on female experience in a way that makes me almost 100% certain that he is looking to make a statement.
Yeah, much more so. I mean, lots of Japanese filmmakers from this period are focused on female experience, but not all of them are making overt feminist statements, and even when they are, they're not always in a contemporary context. Like, for example, Life of Oharu. Very feminist, not very contemporary.
No.
Because the only kind of discussion of him, just going by the Wikipedia page, the only characterization of him as a filmmaker was as, and I did see this echoed in a couple of other pieces, bitter, bleak pessimist. I'm like, as with Billy Wilder, when I read that about Naruse, I'm like, what kind of view do you have to have of the world to think that this is a particularly pessimistic worldview that's being portrayed? Are you an infant?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, to me, it just seems like what's being depicted is the world, and the world is being depicted in a way that is compassionate in both cases, although very differently. Pessimist is not what comes to mind based on the half-dozen Naruse films that we've seen. Yeah, compassion for people having problems, that would be, that would be more like it.
I guess they're just saying he doesn't tend to tell unambiguously happy tales, but that
who does?
Isn't a pessimist.
But I did see, well, there was an article in Slant magazine, for example, that was talking about the overt feminist elements in Sudden Rain, which seems to me to be the only intelligent way to read that film. I also saw some unintelligent readings.
Okay.
That didn't seem to twig to that at all.
Wow.
That were just like, this is a movie about marital strife. Both sides are wrong.
Wow.
That was all I got out of my brief research.
Okay, well, let's jump right in then.
I remember finding this film interesting. I'm really glad we got to see these Naruses again, because they're not structured in any kind of conventional way, and they have a deceptive appearance of being very light. When we first watched a whole bunch of them in a row, particularly these sort of domestic drama type ones, the ones with Setsuko Hara, I liked them all, but nothing was really standing out for me. I noticed that on Letterboxd I rated them all 4 stars, which is what I do when I like something but it's not making a big impression on me. So I'm glad I watched them again. I had this opportunity. This time, this one just seemed really remarkable to me. Just even in terms of the filmmaking approach, like the odd rhythms of it, and the kind of abstractness introduced by these kind of intuitive ways of breaking the film up, including the rain.
Yeah.
But then also the strange climax towards the end with the drama about the dog. But then that's not the climax, it's just a climax.
And it's not resolved.
No, nothing in the whole... and of course, that's the other great thing, is that nothing in the whole film is resolved. The ending is very startling that way.
We have no idea what the town decided to do about the dog. We have no idea what's going to happen with the marriage.
No, it's just an absolutely amazing film that manages to feel as light as a balloon and at the same time as dense as a novel. And it was based on a one-act play, apparently.
Really?
The Sound of the Mountain, on the other hand, was based on a
novel, yeah, it says that in the opening credits.
Yeah, a novel by a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Like Repast.
Yeah, this one definitely bears relation to Repast, although, as you were saying, chronologically, Sound of the Mountain comes between them.
But this one, again, features Setsuko Hara in a marriage with an oaf. Who does
different oaf.
Yeah, it's not Ken Urahara.
No. Ken is there for Sound of the Mountain, though, being worse than an oaf.
Yeah,
far worse than an oaf.
We'll talk about that later. This guy, he's more communicative.
No, this guy is better. 100%. Like, I actually believe that, as we said, the ending leaves everything unresolved, but I actually believe that there could be a future with this guy.
Now, I would say that this husband is a pessimist. I mean, he's kind of given up on anything very good happening.
Well, but he accuses her of that.
That's true.
He says, at least I have dreams.
Yeah, but what are they?
Dreams for himself and dreams at night.
I guess that's all it is, because we don't really see much evidence of him aspiring to anything.
That's
I guess
true.
he likes going to movies.
Okay, well, he's not fulfilling his breadwinner role properly, I guess, is what can be said about him.
No, but he's also not interested in having conversations at home or doing much of anything except for languishing.
Okay, but let's actually go through the film before, because I don't know, it's so detailed and full of particulars that any generalization seems wrong.
That's true. He and Setsuko Hara, though, I mean, they've been married quite a long time.
4 years.
I thought it was more than that.
I thought he said 4 years.
Maybe he did. But when he's talking to the next door neighbor who's just moved in, they're talking about each other's marriages like they each have it better than the other, right?
Yes, that's true. They're each infatuated with each other's wife.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't lead to anything. It's not a wife swapping.
Nothing leads to anything in this movie.
But he does say, you've got like this young, beautiful wife, and Setsuko Hara, according to him, is you can't even see her anymore, I guess.
Well, she's not, as in Repast, she's not glamorized. She's not supposed to be, I guess, a young, stunning beauty, because she can still play that, as we see in Sound of the Mountain.
The next door neighbor, though, does think she's beautiful, but
sure,
not
but
in...
I think he says she's gentle or something. He seems to like her personality. He seems to think she'll be more submissive, because we see in some brief scenes that his wife, because she's young and hot, also orders him around.
Yeah, I guess so, but he says that he's just taking care of her all the time. That's how he puts it.
Because she's a baby.
Yeah.
But he thinks that Setsuko Hara would take good care of him, like a mummy.
Yeah, that does seem to be his idea. Now, just like in Repast, there is a niece that figures prominently, although she's only in the first half of the film.
Right, she comes back in the form of a letter at the end.
Yeah, it's Kyoko Kagawa again, another one of our favorites, or one of my favorites. She's been in a bunch of movies we've discussed already.
And a surprise callback to our Sternberg follow-up episode, the Alpha and Omega of Joseph von Sternberg. The actress who plays the hot wife next door was the star of Anadahan.
I did not place her. I knew that I'd seen her before, but I did not expect it to be Anadahan that we saw her in.
She's very likable in this movie, where we, thanks to subtitles, can actually understand what she's saying.
True.
She's not being voiceovered by Joseph von Sternberg.
The niece has been having trouble. She just got married, and already it sucks.
Yeah, now this is all very interesting and ambiguous in tone already. By the way, the reading of the film was made a little more difficult, interpretation of it, by the fact that these seem to be amateur subtitles.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and there were lots of mistakes, and I was not catching the subtleties of what anybody was saying, so that's unfortunate, although they weren't as bad as that one Ritwik Attack movie that we tried to watch that was impossible.
Well, because the
state of the subtitles was impossible.
Only 10% of the words were translated.
Right, so they're having this conversation, and we've already seen a little domestic argument between the husband and wife about Sundays where they want to do something, but they don't want to do something. Like, they both seem to want to do something, but then anytime anyone suggests doing something, then the other one says they don't want to do anything, and they're sniping at each other.
And he just leaves eventually. He says he doesn't want to go for a walk with her, but then he goes by himself.
Yeah, and he thinks that she nags, and all the typical stuff. Then the niece shows up.
With her sad story.
And she gives her sad story, but it's delivered in a comical way that makes it seem like this is not as dramatic and irreparable as she thinks it is. Like, her husband has acted like a jerk, but she is acting like, the marriage is over before it's begun. And Setsuko Hara is saying all of that to her. To calm down.
Bemused through most of it. Although by the very end, she does seem to decide to get a little bit more on side and say, no, that's unacceptable.
Well, possibly due to the subtitles, I don't understand the shift where as soon as her husband comes home, she then does take the woman's side.
Well, I think that that's part of it. She wants a sense of solidarity at that point when the man comes in, right?
And then the niece has also been goading her by saying that she's lost her fight.
But no, we see that she has it when she needs it.
And so then he takes part in this and tries to tell them the man's side.
Yeah, that he doesn't want to appear henpecked, so he's gotta act big.
It sounds like the plot of a Flintstones episode or something. Like, it's real sitcom stuff. Oh yeah, and then this guy shows up, and he doesn't want to see him like he's henpecked, so then he just has to keep drinking with him all night, and then the next morning, he should sweet talk his wife, but Japanese men are idiots, so we're not gonna do that. And
I like the way he said he expects his intelligent wife to understand why he's doing this, and then when she doesn't, he's disappointed. And
yeah. Anyway, neither of them are buying this at all.
No, but unfortunately, I think that is a fairly accurate diagnosis of a lot of male behavior. Certainly under those kinds of patriarchal conditions, which are only a little bit lessened in our time.
Oh yeah, this like Mars and Venus gender misfiring, genders commiserating with each other about how their wife or husband just doesn't get it, just all makes me want to just vomit.
Yeah, but it's real. This is a real reflection of how people live.
Yeah, and well, not lived. Like, a lot of people are still living like this.
Yeah, they continue to live this way to a large extent.
But I mean, this is obviously the impression that the movie is wanting to give, and it does eventually shift away from that. Then we get this dog subplot, whose meaning is never made clear, and it does seem similar to the cat subplot, but more highly developed because it involves the whole community and not just Setsuko Hara. So she's feeding a stray dog, basically.
A child for her, to some extent.
Yeah, like the cat was.
Yeah. Now, this dog is a bit of an outlaw.
In her past.
The dog has been causing trouble. People are afraid of being bitten, and a lot of property is being stolen and chewed up.
See, I love this about Naruse because this is obviously either a symbol or an objective correlative for some inner state of Setsuko Hara's character, but neither is ever made clear.
No, it's good. It's much better when it's left that way.
Not clear at all what any of this means, but it's just intriguing. One thing it does do is that it crystallizes the fact that this neighborhood is gross. There's like a committee of Karens.
Well,
it starts with one Karen who is objecting to this dog's behavior, to her encouragement to the dog to come around, and literally wants her to go through the process of getting the dog licensed and leashed and everything else if she's going to treat it like it's her pet.
Well, she says you should probably have this dog put down.
Well, she says that too, yeah. But she also suggests going through the procedures.
Well, she's the teacher.
Of the kindergarten, I guess?
I guess so.
Yeah, because later the kindergarten chicken...
Yeah, it's a suburb outside of Tokyo. The husband works in Tokyo.
Oh yeah, and of course the setting could not be more different again from Ozu. This is much lower class.
Definitely has less chic to it. A lot of Ozu takes place in suburbs of Tokyo as well.
Not these suburbs.
No. A lot of parallelism between the two marriages. It sort of teases you with the idea that there might be some kind of infidelity plot, but it never develops in any way at all. It
teases you with everything, and nothing ever develops. That's one of my favorite types of short story. Might be one of the reasons I can't get a short story published.
Another vector in the story is the husband's job, which is in danger at a certain point. It only starts to happen about halfway through, because mostly we've been in the house with them or walking around the town going to different...
We're going to the market.
Yeah, local products.
Oh yeah, that was the translation every time. I'm going to go get get some local products.
I think it just means groceries or something like that, right?
Yeah, but I guess from the market.
But the husband works in a sales department for a perfume company. There's some kind of merger that has occurred. 4 people from the other firm are coming over, and they're encouraging 4 employees, current employees, to resign in exchange for an extra bonus so that the company doesn't have to just outright lay off 4 people.
Weird. So 4 people, like, at random, 4 people are supposed to just put their heads on the chopping block for the extra money.
Well, if you know that you can get another job, then that's a great deal. You get a whole bunch of extra money.
Well, he doesn't, though.
No, of course not. He doesn't think he can do any better or go anywhere.
But he still is thinking about resigning.
Yeah, well, it's demoralizing to have this kind of choice put before you.
So it seems like they're each separately involved in some terrible Shirley Jackson lottery situation where there's this bizarre social pressure being put on them.
And there's another thing going on with him, which is that he pretty much can't eat at all. He has a terrible stomach ailment. People are suggesting that he have part of his stomach removed.
Yeah.
As the best option.
Well, yes, he's feeling a great deal of stress. He doesn't like this city life.
No, and he does have the option of going back to the country. That's where he's from. There is a family farm that he could take over.
But not, as late in the story, Setsuko Hara points out that, no, you actually can't, because you've already got a brother working it, so if you went back, this has always been your fantasy to go back. But
so
if
he
you
does
go
have
back,
dreams.
If you go back, you'll just be sitting around eating their food.
Yeah.
That's what she says.
That is what she says, yes.
They don't need extra help. So he does have this fantasy in the back of his mind. This is what he'd actually really like to be doing. He doesn't want to be in this place, being this breadwinner either. And I guess the central conflict of the movie that gradually develops is that he doesn't want to be this breadwinner, but he doesn't want her to be, or even an economic contributor at all.
Right, because what the group comes up with, his best friends at the perfume company, they say, let's all 4 give our letter of resignations. We'll each collect 200,000 yen as the severance and bonus. Then we'll pool our resources and buy a restaurant or bar. And Setsuko Hara will be our front woman because everyone will want to come to the bar. And
now,
she likes the idea.
She does, although we're not sure about this at first because she's just kind of giggling and being like, what the hell?
No, she thinks it's cool.
That's when she's serving the kindergarten chicken. Tough chicken.
Yeah, because it was an egg-laying chicken which was being used as a petting zoo example of where eggs come from or something.
And then the dog came and got it.
Killed it, yeah.
One of the Karens brings her this dead chicken, so I guess she's like, well, we have to pay for it anyway, so I'm going to cook it.
Yeah, 500 yen for that one chicken.
And so the men are all eating this tough chicken in their soup.
And actually, you know, if you know Naruse, and it's not like we're experts, but we've seen quite a few of his films, what they're talking about here is starting one of these establishments that Naruse will actually spend several movies just examining in detail.
Right, so this is part of the reason I say, because we do have that background, part of the reason I say that the husband's perspective isn't entirely wrong in this movie. It's not just that he objects to her working in this scenario, although he does. He knows that what they're saying, in so many words. That guy from the Ozu movies, what's his name? The comedy actor?
Yes, Daisuke Kato has some very memorable performances to come in other Naruse movies and also in An Autumn Afternoon, the Ozu film, Ozu's last film.
So he says, it's a woman's world now. Men are useless. You have to use your looks. So he is kind of suggesting that she prostitute herself.
When a woman ascends the stairs, yeah.
And we know from the other Naruse films that this is not some utopia. This is in itself bringing problems for women. It's basically like being a modern geisha.
Yeah, kind of.
And even if they become, I think in some of the films they are business owners, but then you're fighting with rival business owners, and it's not an easy life. It's never an easy life, because he actually pays attention. I mean, maybe this is part of why critics think he's a pessimist. He actually pays attention to economic conditions in all of his films.
Yes, he does. Nothing's going to be perfect. Nothing's going to work particularly well for people under capitalism. There are always going to be compromises being made, and exploitation is going to be occurring throughout. That's how it works.
But in this case, sort of to our surprise, based on how she first appears, she is going for this.
Yeah.
I saw one write-up that described this wife character as a shrew to her husband. I guess that's a reading you're going to get if you're not looking at it through a feminist framework. I didn't find her shrewish. I found her frustrated. Initially, they were both sniping at each other. Later on, she surprisingly calmly stands up for her viewpoint in their arguments, right? And she's not shrieking or throwing things or exhibiting any kind of shrew behavior.
No, I think it's a very nicely judged performance, obviously, and staging of this problem by Naruse.
So all of this very gradually comes into focus with all of these little particulars we've been talking about, but I do find it interesting. Let's backpedal to the neighbors. So this is where the title comes in. So, we first meet the schlubby husband neighbor. It kind of is like the Flintstones.
They don't really explain how the schlubby husband has this wife.
Can't have an amazing job. Everybody's got the same job in this neighborhood.
Pretty much.
Economic level, I mean. Well, we first meet this guy because he comes over and gives
coupons for the noodle shop.
Yep. And the guy comes on his bicycle and kind of nicely breaks up the first whole long sequence by delivering noodles twice. Although he delivers udon by mistake the first time.
That's right.
It all looks good to me. And then they get to know each other a little better during this sudden rainfall because he helps Setsuko Hara bring the laundry in, even though his luggage is still sitting outside, apparently.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole movie dilemma. So then Setsuko Hara is getting to know the wife, and they go to the market together, and then they run into the Karens, and the Karens are describing a movie that could be Tokyo Story, and then I think they just start gossiping about the neighborhood and love affairs in the neighborhood. Then everyone starts talking about movies because they run into Setsuko Hara's husband. We're just not even bothering with names this time. Then by the end of it all, he ends up walking home with the hot wife. She talks about how much she likes movies, and they've made a date. And it sounds like they've made a date, but it turns out that means
a foursome.
However, everybody sort of understands that the only reason either of them wants to go to the movies is so they can flirt with each other. And so the other two parties to this aren't very interested in going.
No, both of them beg off at the last minute.
And we've seen, in Repast, we saw her character do that. When her husband is flirting with another woman, just kind of cut herself out of this.
Well, in that case, his niece, yeah.
Yeah, right? But it was the same idea. Just tell him to go off and do his thing.
She does develop a nice friendship with this neighbor, and they go together to that...
The husband, you mean?
City council.
Yeah, it's true. But the whole thing I was leading up to here is that then it's the next day after this flirtation where they do end up going alone to the movie together that he wants to tell her about his dream.
Right.
And it's in the same conversation that he tells her it's not working. Their marriage isn't working because she doesn't have any dreams, and he seems to mean fantasies, right? She needs to have fantasies to sustain her or something. Like, that's all I could get out of it, given our limited translation.
He doesn't want her to have the fantasy of running a bar, though, unfortunately.
Well, no, he doesn't want the reality.
Yeah.
She can have all the fantasies she wants as long as she stays within these feudal confines, as she later calls them. She tells him he's very feudal when he insists that she can't work. But I find this dream interesting that he's talking about this young girl, this teenage girl who saves a man in the woods from committing suicide. Obviously, in the context, you think he's going to say it was the next-door neighbor, like a complete idiot with no censor, no inhibitions. He's just going to say this. But of course, it turns out that he says the woman in the dream looked like you. But
yeah.
She gives no fucks.
No, she's not impressed.
She's not impressed by this, but I was a little bit moved by it. I mean, it means that he does feel, as bad as he is at expressing anything, he does feel this deep kinship with her.
Sure. The moment where he's at his lowest, when he is considering leaving the firm after a considerable amount of time and not sure what to do next, he does call her and ask her to meet him in Tokyo. That scene's interesting, too, because he's talking to an old friend. Seems like they may have gone to college together or something, because the guy asked him, where does literature come into this? So they must have studied in the arts. And all he can say is that, well, we have sales in Thailand and some other places, so linguistic knowledge comes in handy. But obviously, he is not using the skills that he had honed in academia.
Right, okay.
So again, this points to a man who is disillusioned, but had a much more grandiose idea of what his life was going to be than it is.
And of course, that harmonizes with the wife's dream that she did have that gets mentioned at the beginning of the film, and that is, as the better articles on the film point out, we're constantly reminded of it throughout the film by the tinkling Western piano music, which is that she gave up music. She sacrificed music because I guess she's not allowed to study anything either. Not allowed to have any hobbies. In addition to not being allowed to earn any money, she's just supposed to run the house and have fantasies.
Yeah.
Or else she was planning to be a professional musician, and he said, not if you marry me. Both of these people are in roles that are very, very constrictive. It really does give an idea that the husband is not leading a life any better than his wife's, but the difference is that she says there are ways we could fix this, and he's thwarting those.
Right, because any of the ways that you could fix them would be problematic for him as a man in that society.
Exactly.
As he already explained, men have to spend all of their time making sure that they're not perceived as weak or henpecked or in any other way beholden to women.
And so we get this climactic night. There's the suggestion, there's the kindergarten chicken meal, and the suggestion that she could become the figurehead of their new restaurant venture.
It does all happen in one evening, because
then,
in the middle of that, she leaves to go to the city council meeting.
And it's so funny. It's so hilarious. And everyone just starts shooting accusations at each other about annoying... Like, this is this society, this is this neighborhood that they have. Everyone's just complaining about each other's presence.
And it's not everyone ganging up on Setsuko Hara, not at all. That's what the woman who organized the council meeting wanted. She tries to keep people on track.
I don't think it's a city council meeting. It's just like an informal neighborhood gathering, but she does collect fees from them.
And she wants it to be about dogs.
And she keeps trying to bring it back to dogs. But there's too many issues.
People are complaining about how their children are afraid of dogs, and then one guy is like, well, your kids are worse than the dogs. And it just goes from there.
And people are noisy, and they smell, there's bad smells, and all sorts of things. So that's just kind of chaos. Then she comes back and has this whole argument with her husband about working, because he says he kicked his friends out.
Yeah.
And she says that, well, actually, I thought their idea was fine. But it's a very calm, no one's screaming at each other.
No.
They're both reasoning from their positions.
The way that discussion ends is that he's still thinking about just leaving, going back to the country. They'll separate because she doesn't want to go there.
Right, he decides that they're going to have to separate if she's going to insist on her working as the only other solution, and not coming with him. And then, of course, you must have noticed the ending is a bookend to the first scenes, where they're eating breakfast together again, and the letter comes from the niece, as it did before, and this time, I guess it's another Sunday.
Yeah,
Did this all happen in 1 week?
Probably, yeah.
One act play, yeah.
They've resolved their problems. The niece is now happy.
For now.
Sure.
They didn't decide to end their marriage right after their honeymoon.
Because he was yawning and flirting with waitresses and staying out all night and other stuff, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because at the beginning, it's the way he has the actress play the scene does make you feel that her complaints are exaggerated, but they're actually not.
Well, they start out exaggerated because the first thing she complains about is how he was yawning on the train.
Except that we know that that's exactly what ends repast.
That's true.
So intertextually, in terms of auteurship, it is a big deal. Yeah, so we get that they have resolved their issues, but that doesn't help this couple resolve their issues. And you probably also noticed that in those first scenes, he is constantly ordering her, quietly, but not politely, to do basic things for him, like hand him things and pour him things. In this new scene, she is not doing any of that.
Right.
So a definite change has happened. It's like the world's quietest, subtlest version of A Doll's House.
If they've decided to separate, he wouldn't even have any basis upon which to ask her to do things for him anyway.
But he's still looking at her like there's the expectation.
Nothing coming from her side. Then I guess fate intervenes.
You know, it's so funny. I was just writing down in my journal childhood memories the other day, because I just had one of those milestone birthdays, 45, and I remembered my stepsister when I was very young, when we were 5 to 10 years old, and my stepsister would visit us on the weekends, and often we'd go out as a family, and sometimes we'd go to ice capades. That was really exciting in Winnipeg. This one time we went out and brought back balloons, and then the next day we played balloons until she had to go home to her mother's house. Like, just played balloons for hours because there was nothing else you could really start doing while we were waiting for her mom to pick her up or whatever, her time to go home. This game appears to be universal. Keep the ball in the air. That appears to be a universal game.
Yeah.
That is endlessly amusing to children.
Some of those kids that were being complained about at the neighborhood council bop a balloon into the yard.
Well, they call it a balloon. It looks like a ball, though, but it's light. It's like a blow-up ball.
It looks like a balloon to me.
You thought that was a balloon?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I thought it was
floats
a
a
ball.
lot more easily than a ball would.
Oh, all right. Well, whatever it is.
This husband, who has shown very little whimsy throughout the course of this film, starts hitting it into the air.
It's interesting, because when, by surprise, in a sort of jump cut, Setsuko Hara turns up behind him and starts playing as well. She's having a very easy time of keeping it in the air, and he's really struggling.
Well, he can't even eat. He probably has no energy. But he's really determined.
He's exhibiting a lot of energy in the service of keeping this ball or balloon in the air.
And the kids are watching. Now, the dog doesn't show up to watch. We never see the dog again. We don't know what's going to happen with the dog.
And they're batting it back and forth in a way that's angry, but the ball itself is, of course, very light, so that gives a literally light tone to this scene.
It does. This one, I don't feel like it's ambiguous.
Oh, the symbol, yes.
Yeah.
But it's so playful and delightful that you don't mind that it's an obvious
fantastic.
metaphor.
They're going to try to keep this marriage in the air for a while longer.
And the only way they're going to be able to do that, and we don't know the specifics of who's going to compromise on what, but the only way they're going to be able to do that is by having some sense of play.
It's a really remarkable ending.
Yeah, and that's it.
No sudden rain at the end or anything. Sudden balloon is maybe a better title. A great film.
Yeah, I thought it was 5 stars this time, for sure.
All right, onward to Sound of the Mountain. I think the first thing to say about it, especially considering where we have been in the Setsuko Hara series, is that it's based on a novel, as we said earlier, but it does also seem to be very much in dialogue with the Ozu, the Noriko canon.
Yeah, we noticed that the first time that we watched it, because we did come to Naruse after having seen a bunch of Ozus that time too, but it seemed just as striking this time. So yeah, I guess the character and the storyline and the metaphors, they were all in the novel, but the casting of Setsuko Hara brings it into dialogue with the Noriko films.
Yeah, and it's not like this is a movie that could have been made by Ozu, because I don't think it explores the same things that Ozu looks
not
at.
All. It feels like it's a feminist critique, or not even critique, but just a feminist examination of this character type.
And the milieu that Ozu presents, and...
Yeah, because these people are a lot wealthier than the prior two that we looked at with Setsuko Hara.
Visually, we do get a lot of shots of hallways. It does definitely seem to be saying to the audience, hey, does this remind you of someone? It's not shot like an Ozu film, but there are more than enough visual references to cause a viewer to think, okay, let's think about this in dialogue with the Noriko movies, which have just ended. Tokyo Story was the year before.
Even the elderly couple seem to be referring to Tokyo Story, and the stepdaughter relationship seems to be referring to Late Spring. It's just a cornucopia of Ozu references.
And the stepfather in
all
this film...
All of them, I guess, brought into play by the casting.
Yeah, the stepfather in this film actually played the eldest son in Tokyo Story the year before. He was not a 70-year-old man, he was a 40-year-old man.
One thing that I noticed much more this time, because after doing this series and looking very closely at her performances in different films, is that although she's playing this a lot more like Noriko, certainly than her other Naruse characters that we've seen, she's not playing it exactly like Noriko.
No, of course not.
She is adding a layer of childlikeness that is not present in her performances as Noriko. And also the bitterness that is in the Noriko character at times isn't present either. What is similar is, in this film she's trying at first, for the first half of it or whatever, she is trying to appear happy and conciliatory. She's really not. Like, Noriko is either, when she's grinning her face off, she's either really feeling joyous at that moment, or she's really feeling the opposite of it. But this character is simpler.
I suppose she's simpler, but
But then she does turn out to be complex.
she's in a very difficult situation because she does love everything about her marriage except for her husband. She has married into a family that adores her, that gives her a kind of structure that we see her reluctant to leave in the Ozu films.
Yes. You could also think of this as the backstory of Noriko from Tokyo Story.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because,
With
again,
that awful husband that is briefly and enigmatically referred to, that has made her decide to never get married again.
Maybe, but I don't know. I feel like Ken in this movie is worse than
anything
husband.
Ozu could imagine.
This is a real terrible person.
And we are not given any indication in this film of what has brought him to this point.
But the interesting thing is that most of his worst acts are off-screen.
Yeah.
We certainly don't see him kicking and punching his pregnant mistress.
The way he talks about Setsuko Hara's character in this film, kind of reminiscent of Cary Grant talking about Katharine Hepburn in the Philadelphia Story. He does seem to think that something in her character is driving him toward this terrible behavior.
Right, well, he says...
Or something in their dynamic with each other.
He says that she is a placid lake and his mistress is a torrent, and he also describes her as a child and a daughter, and of course, it's being exacerbated in his mind by seeing his own father dote on his wife that way, and her response to it, which is to play up that relationship.
He also, in this extraordinary discussion with his father about her abortion, he also talks about her as living by her own set of rules, and he seems to think that the abortion is a kind of punishment of him. We don't know whether that... The father has his own opinions, but she is not in any way the point of view character of this film.
No.
People are, discussing her as this enigmatic figure, and everyone has their own opinion on what her set of personality traits constitute.
If anyone's the point of view character, it's definitely the father.
Yes, which is apparently true of the novel.
Right.
Actually, the novel is very much about the father.
Okay.
Just based on the Wikipedia entry. The father's own... And you can see this to some extent. I guess I was distracted from that by the fact that we're looking at this as a Setsuko Hara film, but the novel is about the father's realizations of his failures as a father.
Right, because his kids are both fucked up. His daughter is in a marriage to a smuggler and small-time criminal she keeps running away from and gets very little support when she's at home. Everyone, including the mother, is always saying that this father never really warmed to his unattractive young daughter. I mean, she's not unattractive, but
no, exactly.
They say she is.
Well,
she's not as attractive as Setsuko Hara.
Yeah, compared to the way Setsuko Hara is styled in this movie. In the film, it's only kind of briefly mentioned in passing. Apparently, the novel has more about this. The father seems to have repeated history in that he wanted to marry the more beautiful sister, but ended up
died
with the homely one, and then again he has now chosen the beautiful daughter-in-law over his homely daughter.
Yeah.
Although obviously that didn't happen in childhood. This pattern was set in childhood, and he favored this son who has turned into such a monster. But we don't really understand, I don't think we really understand in the film how their dynamic led to this son being so terrible. I guess what's more important is just the father's reaction to realizing that he somehow failed this son.
No, he's failed everybody. And he does own up to that at the end.
So we're presented with a kind of Tokyo Story situation in that this elderly couple finds that they have a better relationship with their daughter-in-law than with their own children, particularly than the son who they're living with, but it is more weighted, much more weighted toward the relationship with the father. It's not at all like the way Ozu presents the relationship between the older couple in Tokyo Story, who aren't exactly, like we talked, when we did that movie, we talked about, do these people really love each other? But anyway, they have definitely created over time a strong bond and dependency, and husband is really going to feel his wife's loss.
Sure.
At the end of it. They formed a unit within the world, basically. But in this film, this seems to be a very unhappy couple that has learned to live with their unhappiness.
Yeah, he's pretty much annoyed with her. Whenever they focus in on the father and mother alone, I mean, it's mostly him staring at her as she snores and trying to silence her and trying to read. And
I thought it was a really interesting performance from this actress in that, as with the daughter, she does seem really annoying to us all of the time. Like, we are within the father's perspective, insofar as we can see how he's feeling, how annoyed he is by these women who are so basic compared to the beautiful and gentle and troubled Setsuko Hara. But nevertheless, everything they're saying that they're accusing him of is correct.
Wife's only sin is that she snores. I mean, like, other than that, she seems...
And she's not gorgeous, and she prattles. I don't know what to say.
But she also loves Setsuko Hara. Like, she's not resentful of her. She's just trying to point out that, at least try to be nice to your own daughter as well. She's not saying you have to be mean to Setsuko Hara, you have to do anything. You just, like, spread your love around a little more.
But she's also saying that you favor your son so much that you aren't actually, like, you may pity Setsuko Hara, but you're not actually intervening in any meaningful way because you're just letting him get away with all of this.
Well, yeah, but I think that might have been the way it started, but I think it becomes fairly clear that at a certain point, the equilibrium has shifted, and now he's just worried that if anything happens in their marriage, he's going to lose his daughter-in-law.
Well, it shifts because of the secretary. This secretary
Miss Tanizaki.
Of the fathers, I think based on their conversation in the train, the father and son's conversation in the train early on, that he was either previously having an affair with her or at least just dated her, flirted with her. But now that she's the father's secretary, he doesn't want that to continue. He thinks that would be a bridge too far.
Yeah, that would be rather gauche. So he's moved on to an affair with someone else.
But she's resentful of this.
Yeah, although she's still close enough with him that she goes on double dates with him and stuff like that.
But, I mean, she obviously is resentful or disapproves or both, because once the father starts questioning her about this new affair, she's only too willing to give him all the intel on it.
Although she also feels like she has to resign after that. Her life sucks. Everyone who comes in touch with Ken Urahara in this film is the poorer for it. He is just a leech and monster.
And really, Setsuko Hara is just kind of flitting in and out of scenes for the longest time, and we're almost never given her perspective directly. There are a few odd moments, like every night when the drunk husband comes home after seeing his mistress, he appears to, and we later find out is in fact ordering her to have sex with him.
Yeah, he just summons her to the bed.
Yep, and they do something that results in pregnancy.
And everyone's just kind of hoping she doesn't realize he's having an affair.
Well, everyone also... he himself, he is a monster, but he is a very sort of common, when we see him, common, reasonable monster who is pretty self-aware. He's not doing bitter denunciations of anybody. He first says, he's the first one to say, I'm sure she already knows. He's not an idiot.
No. Because
he's having sex with both women and even manages to simultaneously
impregnate
them. The question is, what he seems to be really getting out of this affair is which is also kind of Philadelphia story-ish, is the ability to act like a wild maniac.
Insane drunken debauchery every night at the mistress's house. That's what we're told.
All we're told is that he gets drunk and acts crazy and then has to be sung to calm him down.
Right. We never ever see this because he's just the usual George Brent.
Just very ironic, calm and ironic and kind of dissipated looking.
Yeah, I mean, he just weaves about a bit when he gets home that's his drunkenness. He's not a screaming drunk.
No, he's gotten it all out of his system.
These are really interesting choices by Naruse not to show any of that stuff.
Or maybe it's true in the novel, too. We just hear, you actually couldn't show a scene like that what is described. I've never seen a scene like that in a movie from this period. Have you? Kicking and punching a pregnant woman?
Samurai movies have that kind of stuff in them.
Kicking and punching pregnant women?
Film set in history. I mean, Life of Oharu has insanely terrible things happening to her.
Yeah, I don't know. Depictions of the samurai era as negative seem to have been highly approved at the time, but...
Yeah, so maybe you can't have that kind of stuff shown in contemporary films.
Modern businessmen? No.
It's better to not show it and just to have it all be referred to. It just makes it extra eerie.
It's very Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but without any seeing of the Mr. Hyde. He's just reported.
That's right. The first scene, I think it's really important to note, and there are many echoes of it later on in the film. It's Setsuko Hara and the father-in-law walking in this laneway up to the house. He notices a sunflower, beautiful sunflower, and then launches into a big discourse upon how wonderful it would be if you could have your head rinsed out, have it blossom anew like a fresh flower.
Whenever I see a sunflower, I think of men's heads. That's what he says.
Because it's the same size.
Yeah, and then he wants to be able to just take a rest with his head removed and have the hospital clean it out and then put it back on him when they're done.
Presumably have them clean out everything he knows about his children, maybe his own behavior in his marriage, and everything else that's gone before the beginning of this film.
Now, the treatment of both suicide and abortion are interesting in this film, and they're actually brought into relation to each other.
Yeah.
Because it's during this whole suicide discussion with the old couple that we find out about Setsuko Hara's abortion. It's kind of a grotesque comedy scene where the wife just starts reading to her daughter-in-law, just starts reading this newspaper article about an old couple that doesn't want to be... So, Tokyo Story again. Doesn't want to be a burden to their children, so they decide to commit suicide. Oh, just listen to this delightful note.
Everyone still loves us now. We're not a problem yet. Let's go out on a high note and kill ourselves.
And then she puts it down and she's kind of chuckling and she's like...
what would you write in your note?
Yeah, if you and your husband committed suicide together, what would you write?
Setsuko Hara...
She breaks down at that point.
She says she'd want to write something to her father-in-law, and that's it. And we actually see her sitting down to write a letter.
Do we?
Yeah, when he comes in, the only way I could interpret it is that if he hadn't come into her room and told her that he knew about the abortion, it seemed like she was preparing maybe to kill herself so that nobody would ever find out about it. Or at least so that she would never have to talk to him about it. But he preempts that by just saying, everybody knows you just had an abortion. And that does seem to save her from doing something really drastic. Instead, she leaves the next day for her parents' house, which obviously wasn't as wonderful as this house in terms of her relationship with the elder generation.
I guess not.
But she is able to get to a point where she's not suicidal anymore.
So we're, again, not given her own perspective, except through glimpses like that, about this abortion, but we are...
Yeah, we have to guess at a lot of the things that are going on with her.
It's discussed with the father and son, as I've already alluded to. The suicide and abortion discussions seemed... I'd be interested to know if they are typical or atypical of Japanese culture. You couldn't have discussions like this, my God, in an American film at the time.
No. Well, of course, abortion. It's going to be illegal again very soon, thanks to the Supreme Court.
I know Buddhism is atheistic, technically, but this seems like a very atheistic discussion. But I assume also...
Suicide is an important part of feudal Japanese culture anyway. If you're a highborn person who has failed in some way, although that's true of European nobility as well.
Yeah, but it was carried on into the 20th century in Japanese culture with, people like Mishima committing... Of course, he was a maniac, but...
Yeah, and he was also a fascist throwback kind of guy.
It's true, but you still don't see cultural figures like this in 20th century American history.
Well, we actually saw it in Sternberg, right?
Dishonored, the general or whoever he is.
Yeah, that's what you do. Once you've been exposed and you have nothing else you can do, you shoot yourself rather than go on trial and be demeaned in that way.
That's something that only happens in melodramas at that point.
Sure.
The melodrama trope. Yeah, the treatment of both things seems very atheistic in this film, so I don't know where legally or morally abortion was supposed to stand in Japanese culture in general, but she goes to a doctor, so presumably
it's a hospital.
It was legal.
Yeah, it's not a back alley thing.
The point being that she wants children, so this
is not under these circumstances.
Yeah, so this is not something that she wanted to do.
No.
And it signifies her despair about her marriage in general.
It'd probably be even more painful to think that for some reason this child brought her husband back. That would be the wrong reason for him to come back.
The father calls it a semi-suicide.
Yeah.
So it's not an act against God to have aborted this fetus. It's an act against herself.
Yes.
And so that is in line with... We've discussed the Noriko character in terms of the main line of 19th century Anglo-American novel heroine heroines.
Of the Protestant will.
Yeah, in Harold Bloom's phrase, heroines of the Protestant will. That tradition, beginning with Clarissa Harlow, these are women who have internalized their own oppression to such a degree that the only way that they're able to exert their very strong will is through acts of aggression. Self-denial. Self-denial or acts of aggression against themselves.
Right.
Masochism. So that makes sense. This is a much more, you wouldn't actually see Noriko do something this violent and physical as abortion or semi-suicide in a Ozu film, but it does seem in keeping with the general idea.
Yeah, and the world that Ozu creates for the Noriko films doesn't have things like abusive husbands, that doesn't really come into it.
Drunken fathers who traumatize everybody just by being incoherent every night is as far as it goes.
Yeah.
Except for, of course, Tokyo Twilight, his uncharacteristic film.
Yeah, that's a totally different thing, and we're going to talk about that one very soon.
So I think you're right. I think we should not take this husband's idea that his wife is doing this to punish him.
No,
out of her own sense of
he's wrong about
his
that.
own sense of purity. That is a projection.
Yes.
So I think the father is correct in his way of interpreting her act. Now that we've talked it all through. Okay, if this is a sort of feminist critique of Noriko as an image, what do we get out of it? What amounts from it?
I just think it's trying to say there are more dimensions.
But I think it's a straw Ozu, because I don't think she is a child in his films, or childlike. That's more directed towards the broad trope to which she belongs, right? But if you really look in a granular way at what the character is doing, I think that that's incorrect.
Well, yeah, I don't think that Naruse is saying, I'm going to go Ozu one better. I just think that he's saying, I'm going to take some of the materials from the Ozu Noriko world and do something that I want to do with it. That's all. I don't even think I would call it a critique. It's an auteur using these materials in a completely different way.
But does she... In so many ways, it's not a film that's about her character except as an idea.
That's really interesting, because
does she actually break out of this child mold at the end?
Well, she certainly does, and it takes both of them to do it, right? The father-in-law has to help her by finally saying, I'm not going to ask you to come back into this marriage, even though my son asked me to present his case, and he does, but he lays it out in such a dispassionate way.
And she would come back. If she thought the husband might reform, she would come back, but she'd come back for her father-in-law.
Right, and he says, he says he'll do it. He says he'll do all the things he's supposed to do. Yeah, she's waiting for him to say, and I want you to do it. And he says, no, I want you to be free, and I want to see you actually happy, even though that means we can't live in the same house anymore.
So, in a way, it is a feminist critique.
Yes.
In that we have to believe that he's not going to allow her to be in this child role anymore, and that means that there is some future for her as an adult, whatever that means.
Even though, obviously, what would be best for him is if she did stay in that role that was so congenial to him.
Of course, that is a version of what happens in Late Spring.
Yes.
But in this case, the father has to go back and face his own unglamorous family and all of the mistakes that he's made and try to clean this up somehow.
Yeah, again, it's a different situation, but it does use some of the same variables in a totally new way.
And at the end, you get these twin scenes where his daughter is complaining that he doesn't like her cooking.
Yeah.
Complaining in a very nattering, annoying way that he doesn't like her cooking as much as he likes
It's spinach.
Setsuko Hara's.
I make spinach and she makes spinach. What's the difference?
And he's just sitting out there, kind of detached from all of this stupid, mundane family drama, like the father at the beginning of The Cloud Cap Star or something, right?
But that's all before his meeting with Setsuko
No, let me
Hara.
finish. Yeah, it is. It's right before. So we identify with him, the sophisticated figure who thinks all of this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And is annoyed by it and is just going to kind of tune it out. He actually tells her to just be quiet.
Yes, he does.
Just keep your mouth shut. And, you laugh because that's what you're thinking too. But then he corrects himself and realizes, however annoying she may be, she has a point in complaining about me.
Yeah.
and complaining to me.
His...
And then he turns around and says, no, you have kept all of this bottled up inside you all your life. Go ahead, let loose, say what you gotta say.
Yeah, I'm not going to stop you.
And then he kind of turns around and does the same thing with Setsuko Hara.
The final scene in the park is amazing.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite scenes in any movie, really.
Well,
I think it's incredible.
The very ending where she makes that metaphorical comment about the vista and then we actually see it. And suddenly everything is contextualized within nature, an Emersonian eyeball nature, right?
Yeah.
Everyone becomes one with it and with the idea and the reality of vision, and I found that very moving.
Yeah, the special nature of their relationship was obscuring so much of what was really going on in the household and what's gone on with the father-in-law's family, even before he met Setsuko Hara, and everyone's got to take a much better look at this. And unfortunately, it means that they're going to have to separate, and they will hopefully still be able to write letters, and I think that's about it.
And I mean, it's fairly radical because it does mean, I guess, divorce for her if she actually wants to go on and have
children. Oh yeah, she's getting divorced, yeah.
Which can't be that common a depiction in Japanese cinema at the time. It's not in American cinema.
No, but we have seen, even in Late Spring, her friend's divorced. So it happens.
That's true. It doesn't happen to Noriko, though. And
in this movie, it's the right decision. There's no ambiguity about that. She has to get away from Ken.
He's a maniac.
He's a horrible person. Like, there's no coming back from that story about him punching and kicking his pregnant mistress.
No.
The other things, maybe you could think, oh, well, whatever, he gets drunk all the time and he doesn't treat his wife very well, but maybe but beating people up is another thing entirely, and it's not going to change. And the last we see of him,
if it's going to change, it's not going to change within the context of this marriage, that's for sure.
Last we see of him, he's making arrangements to continue some kind of partying with the smuggler husband.
I honestly don't know what anyone is going to do in this scenario.
There is a big difference in that in this film, the father is not retired yet. He does seem old and he's had some health difficulties, but he actually is still working and he is the boss at work. His son is working for him.
So presumably that means that he could just cut this son and son-in-law out as losses and just focus on helping his daughter, who's probably also going to have to get divorced.
Yeah, because another option that's presented earlier is that for the good of the marriage, the parents should go get their own place. That's another way that they theorize that, okay, this way the son could stop thinking of Setsuko Hara as a dutiful daughter and think of her as a wife.
A sexy prostitute, which is apparently how he has to think of her.
Yeah. But it's a much better solution to just let her go away and do something better with her life.
She's rightfully terrified of this prospect because we have no reason to think that gamble will pay off in anything good. She's just going to be left alone with a crazy guy.
Oh yeah, no, that would have been the worst.
Yeah.
She doesn't want that at all. And she does say pretty firmly, no, don't do that.
Yes.
I'd just be at home waiting for him to come home drunk in the middle of the night if he comes home at all. That's no fun.
Or worse, he'll actually turn his attention to her.
Well, we never get the sense that he would beat up his own wife because he thinks of her in a totally different way. That makes him even more terrible.
Yes, he has a virgin whore complex.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why he has these weird sexual fetishes that we don't know the exact nature of other than violence, that he can only satisfy with mistresses.
This is more that we get from Naruse.
The mistress is, of course, presented...
She's a really sympathetically presented character.
And we haven't mentioned that, she's living with this other woman, and they have this important friendship where they're each supporting themselves and emotionally supporting each other. And the friend, doesn't she say she has a child that lives with her husband? So she has come out of some kind of terrible marriage herself, presumably.
Yeah, they're having like a Kate and Allie kind of
and she happens
roommate
to have
relationship.
Just gotten involved with this horrible guy that her friend is helping her out with by singing to him.
To soothe him. And yeah, that's a big part of the father's voyage of discovery as well, right? To have to sit down with his son's mistress and find out what her life is actually like and what kinds of terrible things she's been going through. And he does view it all very compassionately, and he doesn't lecture her. I mean, he starts out saying, well, why would you want this unnatural child? And then he shuts up as soon as she starts explaining how she feels about it.
No, what I meant by turning his attentions to her and how that would be the worst is like this idea that they're just going to solve their sex life if they're left alone. Well, his problems with his sex life need a psychiatrist.
Yeah, he's basically Bob from Twin Peaks. I don't hold out much hope for Ken Uehara's character in the future of this film. He may be going to jail. Oh, he should go to jail.
Sure. Again, unless he's like absolutely cut off by every woman.
But yeah, then he'll just go carousing with smugglers.
Yeah, and get himself shot. So, does this sound like a pessimist to you?
The ending of this film fills me with joy. But again, it doesn't present any sort of fantasy resolutions. It's just she's gonna get divorced. And that's about it. She can write to her father-in-law, whom she adores. And they have this moment communing with nature in the middle of Tokyo.
I guess it's important, before he gives this up, it's important that he has met one other gentle soul who sort of understands these higher yearnings that he has had in his life, right? That have kept him ironically separated from his family in a way that's been disastrous, and that have mainly been channeled into a fetishization of physical beauty.
Sure.
Because that is one of the dividing lines in the family. The beautiful couple, she and Japanese George Brent are called. So that, yeah, he can share this moment with her of both of them having this epiphany and understanding what it all has meant. And then he's going to go back to this family and just do his duty.
He's just going to have to deal with it. He's going to have a lot of sorting through to do. And then maybe after he gets through with all of that, he can get his head washed out, rest for a week.
Rest headlessly.
Yeah, then he can emerge as a sunflower. So yeah, we had a letter of reaction from Adam discussing the two James Whale films, especially The Kiss Before the Mirror. Just read it out, it's not a long letter. I thought the comparison to Lost Highway was apt and not something I had picked up on. After the murder and during the scene where Frank Morgan is asking Paul Lucas what happened, I kept thinking the film was going to flashback to show us how we got to that point, Mildred Pierce style. That the film doesn't flashback but shows us how we got to that point by mirroring the circumstance was brilliant. By Candlelight did some mirroring of its own, but class flip-flop. It made for an interesting comparison between the films outside of the different approaches to similar subject matter. Yeah, I think that's true. And actually we got some doubling like that in Sudden Rain as well, with the different marriages commenting on each other.
There's that whole great comic scene between the two husbands when they're both brushing their teeth in the morning.
Yeah.
And just making idle small talk that soon turns into complaining about their wives.
There's some bleed over from James Whale to Naruse this week.
I didn't even know when we were doing the Whale episode, I didn't even know what you were talking about when you throwing ideas at each other in real time here while trying to think of our own.
Oh yeah, there's no planning that goes into these episodes, folks.
In case you thought they were planned and scripted, I didn't even know what you were talking about when you said the Jamesian process of inference, which is how he discovers that
his wife's having an affair.
Yeah.
By watching her in the mirror. And he's, of course, armed with inferential tools imparted to him by Paul Lucas.
And as in James, this process of inference shows every sign of paranoia, but...
Except it happens to be
correct.
correct.
As in James and as in Freud.
And as in Nirvana. Keep writing, Adam. Keep writing anyone else who wants to. Oh, next week, we're moving into 1934 in the Hollywood Year by Year series. And as usual, we go back to our first studio, Paramount. We're going to be talking about a pair of really problematic films in terms of their depiction of race. I am certain in the case of Four Frightened People by Cecil B. DeMille, because I did see that one once before. It's about a bunch of white Europeans stranded somewhere that they didn't expect to be, and I don't think it has a very enlightened approach to this situation.
Well, I mean, that genre wouldn't even exist with an enlightened approach.
No, exactly. So be ready for that.
Val Lewton could do that.
Yeah, but Cecil B. DeMille cannot. It's an interesting film from what I remember. Claudette Colbert has an unusual role in it. Herbert Marshall. I don't remember much about it, but we're going to be talking about Four Frightened People. The other one is called Behold My Wife. Never seen that film. We picked it because it's an early Mitchell Lyson film, and I didn't know anything about it. Turns out it's going to be about Sylvia Sidney playing the daughter of a
Sylvia Sidney-
Native American chief.
Sylvia Sidney, who was Jewish, but that's immaterial because any woman with dark hair played a non-white person during the entirety of the studio era and beyond.
It's true, but I wasn't expecting that from this particular film, but that's what we're gonna get.
100% when we were looking up films to choose, I 100% told you that that's what that was about.
Oh, well, I didn't remember.
You just blocked that out.
I just love Sylvia Sidney.
Also, I couldn't, I mean, I didn't think you could possibly care after Duel in the Sun.
I'm just saying, these are both gonna be fucked up movies in terms of white supremacy, so let's be ready for it. Now, it's supposed to be a sympathetic portrayal of a woman who marries into a kind of well-to-do family that doesn't accept her because of her race, but she's not actually a Native American person, so there's always that cutting back against.
It's similar to Duel in the Sun in that she is sort of accepted into a wealthy family and also sort of not.
Yeah.
In that case, because Lionel Barrymore is a racist.
And we're going to see what Paramount and Mitchell Leisen did with it very soon, next week.
See you then.
Yes.